I never thought my Tuesday morning would start with Barbara Henderson from the HOA standing at my doorstep with a master key in one hand and a clipboard in the other. But there she was, her thin lips pressed together in that signature look of disapproval that made my stomach turn. "Nathan Quincy, I'm here to conduct an emergency safety inspection," she announced, not waiting for my response before pushing past me into my townhouse in Scottsdale, Arizona. I had moved here 6 months ago, thinking the Desert Springs community would be a peaceful place to settle down after my divorce. I was wrong. "What? You can't just barge in here," I said, still holding my coffee mug, wearing sweatpants and an old college shirt. It was barely 7 in the morning. "According to Section 12.4 of your HOA agreement, the board has the right to conduct emergency inspections when there's a reported safety violation," Barbara said. Her silver-streaked brown hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. She was maybe 55, with the kind of build that suggested she spent her free time doing yoga and complaining about things. "What safety violation? I haven't done anything." Barbara didn't answer. She marched straight into my living room, her sensible flats clicking against my hardwood floors. Following behind her were 2 other people I recognized from HOA meetings. Gerald something, a balding man who always agreed with everything Barbara said, and Patricia Wu, the HOA secretary who at least had the decency to look uncomfortable about this whole situation. "There," Barbara said triumphantly, pointing at my 3 space heaters positioned around my living room and home office area. "Unauthorized heating devices, multiple fire hazards." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. "You're joking. Those are just regular space heaters. It gets cold at night, and the central heating in this place barely works. These units were not approved by the Architectural Review Committee, and they pose a significant fire risk to the entire community," Barbara said, pulling out her phone and taking pictures of each heater. "We're confiscating them immediately." "You're not confiscating anything. Those are my property, and there's nothing wrong with them. They're all UL certified and brand new. I bought them at Target 3 weeks ago." Barbara pulled a printed document from her clipboard. Section 18.7 clearly states that any heating or cooling device beyond the central HVAC system must be approved in writing by the board before installation. You never submitted a request. "Because normal people don't need permission to plug in a space heater," I said, feeling my face getting hot. "This is insane. You can't just take my stuff." "Gerald, begin collection," Barbara ordered. The man moved toward the first heater, a small ceramic unit next to my couch. I stepped in front of him. "Touch that and I'm calling the police," I said. Barbara's eyes narrowed. "The police will side with us. This is HOA property as of this moment due to the violation. You can dispute it at the next board meeting in 2 weeks, but until then, these hazards are being removed. This isn't HOA property. This is my home and those are my heaters." Patricia spoke up quietly. "Barbara, maybe we should just issue a warning first and give him time to submit the proper paperwork." Barbara whipped around to face her. "Patricia, we've already had this discussion. The safety of 300 families in this community comes before one person's convenience. We're taking them." I pulled out my phone. "I'm documenting this. You're literally stealing from me." "Document all you want," Barbara said. "Gerald, proceed." What happened next felt surreal. Gerald unplugged my heater and picked it up. I stood there, phone recording, as these 3 people walked through my house and collected all 3 of my space heaters. The small ceramic one from the living room, the tower heater from my bedroom, and the oil-filled radiator-style heater from my home office where I worked as a software consultant. "This is theft," I said again. "This is enforcement. Barbara corrected. You'll receive a written violation notice within 48 hours, along with information about the appeals process and the fines you'll be assessed. Fines. You're stealing my property and fining me. The fine is for the violation itself. $50 per day per unapproved device, retroactive to your move-in date, Barbara said, checking something on her clipboard. That would be 6 months, 3 devices, $50 daily. Let's see, that's approximately $27,000. My coffee mug slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor. $27,000 for space heaters, for willful violation of community standards and safety regulations, Barbara said. She actually looked pleased with herself. Have a good day, Mr. Quincy. Remember, the next board meeting is the 3rd Thursday of the month at 7 p.m. in the clubhouse. They left, carrying my heaters like they'd just solved a major crime. I stood in my living room, staring at the coffee spreading across my floor, trying to process what had just happened. After cleaning up the mess, I immediately called my buddy Derek, who lived 2 streets over in the same community. He answered on the 3rd ring. Nathan, what's up? Did the HOA just come into your place and take anything? What? No, why would they? I explained the whole morning to him. He was silent for a moment. Dude, that's not legal. They can't just enter your home and take your stuff. I don't care what the HOA agreement says. She had a master key. She just walked right in. Okay, that's breaking and entering at minimum. You need to call a lawyer. Actually, call the cops first. That's straight-up theft. I hung up with Derek and dialed the Scottsdale Police Department's non-emergency line. After explaining the situation to the dispatcher, she told me an officer would come by within the hour. Officer Martinez showed up 45 minutes later. He was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with a professional demeanor that put me at ease. I walked him through everything that had happened, showed him the video I'd recorded, and gave him copies of the HOA documents Barbara had referenced. So let me get this straight, Officer Martinez said, reviewing his notes. The HOA president used a master key to enter without your explicit permission, claimed your personal property was a safety hazard despite you having no prior warnings, and then removed said property while threatening you with tens of thousands of dollars in fines. That's exactly what happened. He nodded slowly. HOA disputes are usually civil matters, but this crosses into criminal territory. They can't just take your property, regardless of what the HOA agreement says. That agreement doesn't supersede actual law. So what can I do? I'm going to file a report for theft. I'll also have a conversation with Miss Henderson about the legal boundaries of HOA authority. Where did they take the heaters? I have no idea. Probably the HOA office in the clubhouse. I'll find out. In the meantime, I'd recommend getting a lawyer who specializes in HOA disputes. This is probably going to get complicated. After Officer Martinez left, I spent 2 hours researching HOA attorneys in the Phoenix area. I found one, Richard Kowalski, who had great reviews and specifically mentioned his experience dealing with overreaching HOA boards. His receptionist scheduled me for an appointment the next morning. That evening, I received an email from the HOA. It was a formal violation notice, written in dense legal language, but the gist was clear. I had violated sections 12.4, 18.7, and 23.2 of the community guidelines. The fines would be assessed starting immediately. They were giving me 14 days to appeal before the fines became a lien against my property. I forwarded the email to the lawyer's office with a note asking him to review it before our meeting. The next morning, I drove to Richard Kowalski's office in North Scottsdale. His office was in a modern building with glass walls and desert landscaping. The man himself was in his late 50s, with gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses, wearing a suit that looked expensive but comfortable. "Mr. Quincy, I've reviewed the documents you sent over," he said after we shook hands and sat down in his office. "This is one of the more egregious HOA overreaches I've seen in recent months, and trust me, I see a lot. So I'm not crazy. They can't actually do this." "They absolutely cannot do this," Richard said firmly. "Let's break it down. First, the master key issue. Yes, HOAs often have master keys for emergencies, but emergency means fire, flood, or imminent danger to life or property. A space heater that's properly functioning and OL certified doesn't qualify. Second, the confiscation of your property. Even if there was a violation, which I don't believe there was, the remedy is fines or legal action, not seizure. Third, these retroactive fines are unconscionable and likely unenforceable." I felt some of the tension leave my shoulders. "So what do? We do several things. First, we send a demand letter to the HOA requiring the immediate return of your property and rescinding of the fines. Second, we file a complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate, which oversees HOA management companies. Third, if they don't comply, we file a lawsuit for conversion, which is the civil equivalent of theft, and possibly seek an injunction. How much is this going to cost me?" Richard leaned back in his chair. "I'll be honest with you, Nathan. HOA litigation can get expensive, but in cases this clear-cut, I'm confident we can get a quick resolution. I'm willing to work on a modified contingency basis. You pay me a reduced hourly rate upfront, and if we recover damages or fees, I get a percentage. Does that work?" We agreed on terms, and I left his office feeling like I finally had someone in my corner who understood how insane this situation was. That afternoon, I decided to test something. I called the Scottsdale Fire Department and asked if they could help me understand whether my space heaters actually posed any fire risk. The dispatcher connected me to a fire inspector named Captain Lisa Chen. "Mr. Quincy, I'd be happy to help. Can you describe the units?" I gave her the make and model of all 3 heaters. I heard her typing. "Okay, all 3 of those are OL certified and meet current fire safety standards. The ceramic and tower models have automatic tip-over shutoff features, and the oil-filled radiator is one of the safer designs available. Were these used in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions?" "Yes, I kept them away from curtains and furniture, never left them running when I wasn't home, and plugged them directly into wall outlets, not power strips." "Then no, there's no fire hazard here. These are common household items. We don't regulate their use in private residences as long as they're used properly." "Could you put that in writing? My HOA seized them claiming they were fire hazards." There was a pause. "Your HOA seized your space heaters. That's unusual." "Yes, I can provide you with a written statement. Actually, would you like us to inspect the units directly? If the HOA is claiming they are hazardous, we can test them and provide an official report." "That would be incredible. How do I arrange that? Let me get some information from you." Captain Chen took down my details and explained that she'd reach out to the HOA to arrange an inspection of the confiscated heaters. She also mentioned that if the HOA was making false safety claims, there could be consequences, as fire safety wasn't something to be used as a pretense for other actions. 2 days later, Richard's demand letter was delivered to the HOA board. I got a copy via email. It was 3 pages of sharp legal language essentially telling them they had 5 business days to return my property and rescind the fines or face legal action. The response came faster than expected. I got a call from Barbara Henderson herself that evening. "Mr. Quincy, this is Barbara Henderson from the HOA board. I know who you are. Do you have my heaters? I'm calling to discuss your lawyer's letter. I think there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding. You broke into my house and stole my property." "I did not break in. I used a master key in accordance with community bylaws. And then you took my stuff. That's called theft." Her voice got sharper. "Those devices posed a safety risk. We were well within our rights to remove them temporarily pending review. The fire department disagrees with you. They're actually going to inspect the heaters and provide a report." There was a silence on the other end. "What do you mean the fire department is involved?" "I mean, I called them. They confirmed my heaters are perfectly safe, and now they want to inspect the units you took to verify there are no violations. They should be contacting you to arrange that. You had no right to involve outside agencies in an internal community matter. You involved yourself in my private home and my personal property. I can involve whoever I want. So when am I getting my heaters back? The board will discuss this at our emergency meeting tomorrow night. We'll be in touch." She hung up before I could respond. The next evening, I got an email from Patricia Wu, the HOA secretary. It was brief. The emergency board meeting had concluded, and they were maintaining their position that the heaters were violations. However, they were reducing the fines to $200 total as a goodwill gesture, and I could reclaim the heaters after paying the fine and submitting the proper approval forms. I forwarded the email to Richard with a simple message: "They're not backing down." His response was equally brief: "Good, neither are we. I'm filing the lawsuit Monday." That weekend, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. It was Captain Chen from the fire department. "Mr. Quincy, I wanted to update you. We conducted our inspection of your space heaters this morning at the HOA's storage facility. And all 3 units are in perfect working condition with 0 safety violations. They meet all current fire codes and safety standards. I'm documenting this in an official report that will be filed with our department and sent to both you and the HOA board. Thank you so much. This is exactly what I needed. I'll be honest with you, Mr. Quincy. In my 15 years with the fire department, I've never seen an HOA confiscate space heaters and claim fire safety as the reason. These are common household items. If they were actually dangerous, we'd be seeing house fires constantly. It seems like there's something else going on here. I think the HOA president just doesn't like that I didn't ask permission first." Well, fire safety isn't a tool for enforcing bureaucratic procedures. I'm putting in my report that the HOA's claims of fire hazard were unfounded and that they should not use fire safety as a pretense for property disputes. After hanging up with Captain Chen, I felt vindicated but also angry. Barbara Henderson had literally lied about safety concerns to justify her power trip. Monday morning, Richard filed the lawsuit in Maricopa County Superior Court. The complaint named the HOA, Barbara Henderson personally, and the management company that handled the community's day-to-day operations. We were seeking return of the property, compensatory damages for the illegal seizure, and attorney's fees. The local news somehow got wind of the story. A reporter from a Phoenix news station called me Tuesday afternoon, asking if I'd be willing to do an interview. I checked with Richard first. Normally, I'd say no to media involvement, but in this case, it might actually help. These HOA abuse stories tend to resonate with people, and public pressure could push them toward a settlement. I agreed to the interview. The reporter, Jennifer Liu, came to my townhouse that evening with a cameraman. She was professional and asked good questions. I showed her the video I'd taken of the HOA confiscating my heaters, explained the $27,000 fine they'd initially threatened, and mentioned that the fire department had found 0 violations. "Have you heard from other residents about HOA issues?" Jennifer asked. "Actually, yes. After word got around about what happened to me, several neighbors have reached out with their own stories. The HOA has been pretty aggressive about enforcement." The story aired Thursday evening on the 6 o'clock news. I watched it at Derek's house since he'd invited me over for dinner. The segment was about 4 minutes long and painted a clear picture of HOA overreach. They even included an interview with Captain Chen from the fire department, who confirmed that the heaters posed no safety risk. My phone started blowing up immediately after the segment ended. Texts from neighbors, friend requests on social media, and even a few calls from other lawyers saying they'd be happy to help if I needed it. Friday morning, I got a call from Richard. "You need to see this," he said. "Check your email." I opened my laptop. There was a message from the HOA's attorney, a woman named Susan Clark. The email was formal, but the content was surprising. The HOA board was requesting mediation to resolve the dispute. "Is this good?" I asked Richard. "It means they're worried." The news coverage, the fire department report, and the lawsuit have them spooked. They know they're going to lose if this goes to trial, so they want to settle. "I want my heaters back and I want the fines dropped. That's it. We're going to get more than that. Trust me." The mediation was scheduled for the following Wednesday at a neutral location, a conference room in a Scottsdale office building. I arrived with Richard. On the other side were Barbara Henderson, 2 other board members I recognized, the HOA's attorney Susan Clark, and a representative from the management company. The mediator, an older man named Frank Rodriguez, explained the process. Each side would present their position, and he'd help us find common ground. Susan Clark went first. She argued that the HOA had legitimate concerns about fire safety and was simply enforcing community rules that all residents had agreed to. She acknowledged that the fines were excessive, and that was why they'd been reduced, but maintained that my failure to get approval was a violation. Richard's response was devastating. He presented the fire department's report showing 0 violations, the video evidence of the HOA entering my home without proper cause, and legal precedents showing that HOA agreements cannot authorize theft of personal property. He also pointed out that the bylaws section about heating devices was intended for permanent installations like wood stoves or wall-mounted units, not portable space heaters. Furthermore, Richard continued, the Arizona Department of Real Estate has opened an investigation into the Desert Springs HOA based on multiple complaints they've received since this incident became public. The board's actions here have exposed the entire community to liability. Barbara Henderson's face went red. "That's not fair. We've been trying to maintain property values and keep everyone safe." "By lying about fire hazards and stealing someone's property," Richard shot back. "Miss Henderson, your actions were illegal. The only question now is how much this is going to cost the HOA to make right." Frank, the mediator, held up his hands. "Let's take a breath here. Mr. Quincy, what outcome would satisfy you? I'd thought about this a lot over the past week. I want my heaters returned immediately, all fines dropped and removed from my record, a written apology from the board acknowledging they exceeded their authority, and my legal fees covered. I also want a guarantee that they won't retaliate against me for this." Susan Clark started to object, but Frank cut her off. "Let's caucus separately for a bit." The next hour was spent with Richard and me in one room while he explained what would likely happen if we didn't settle. The HOA would lose the lawsuit, probably have to pay punitive damages on top of my actual damages and attorney's fees, and the negative publicity would continue. Several other residents were apparently considering their own lawsuits over different HOA actions, and my case could open the floodgates. When we reconvened, Susan Clark looked tired. The board is prepared to offer the following: immediate return of the space heaters, all fines dropped, and reimbursement of your attorney's fees up to $5,000. We won't provide a written apology, but we will send a community-wide notice clarifying the policy on portable heating devices. Not good enough, Richard said. The written apology is non-negotiable. Mr. Quincy was publicly accused of creating fire hazards. The record needs to be set straight publicly. Barbara Henderson leaned over and whispered something to Susan Clark. The attorney nodded. We can provide a letter acknowledging that the fire department found no violations with the heating units and that the board exceeded its authority in removing them. But we won't call it an apology. We'll frame it as a clarification. Richard looked at me. I thought about it. Getting a full apology would be satisfying, but honestly, I just wanted this over with. Fine. But I want the full legal fees covered, not capped at $5,000. And I want something in writing that says the HOA board cannot take adverse action against me for any reason related to this incident. More whispering between Susan and the board members. Finally, Susan nodded. Agreed. We'll draft a settlement agreement with those terms. The settlement was signed that afternoon. I walked out of the mediation with a promise that my heaters would be returned within 24 hours. All fines would be removed from my account, and the HOA would pay Richard's fees, which had reached about $8,000. True to their word, Gerald showed up at my door the next evening with all 3 heaters. He looked embarrassed. Sorry about all this, he mumbled, setting them inside my foyer. Barbara was convinced you were going to burn the place down. The fire department disagreed. Yeah, I know. Look, between you and me, a few of us on the board are going to push for her removal at the next election. This whole thing was a disaster. After he left, I plugged in each heater and made sure they still worked. They did. I positioned them back where they'd been originally, took a photo, and sent it to Derek with the caption, Freedom. The HOA sent out the community-wide notice the following Monday. It was posted on the community website and emailed to all residents. The notice explained that portable space heaters and similar devices did not require approval from the Architectural Review Committee, acknowledged that the fire department had found no violations with my specific units, and stated that the board had exceeded its authority in removing them from my home. It stopped short of a direct apology, but it was enough. Several neighbors reached out to say they were glad I'd fought back. A few mentioned they'd had their own issues with Barbara's aggressive enforcement style and felt validated. The Arizona Department of Real Estate investigation continued. About a month after our settlement, I received a notification that the department had issued a formal reprimand to the HOA management company for failing to properly supervise the board's actions. They also required the board to undergo training on legal boundaries of HOA authority. Barbara Henderson was voted off the board at the next election. Patricia Wu became the new president, and one of her first actions was to review and revise the community guidelines to remove vague or overreaching provisions. I ran into Barbara at the community mailboxes about 2 months after everything was resolved. She didn't make eye contact at first, but as we were both walking away, she stopped. Mr. Quincy. I turned. Yes. I want you to know I was only trying to protect the community. Property values, safety, maintaining standards. By lying about fire hazards and stealing my property, she flinched. I didn't lie. I genuinely believed those heaters were dangerous. Based on what? You didn't inspect them. You didn't consult with any fire safety experts. You just decided they were a problem because I didn't fill out a form first. She was quiet for a moment. Maybe I was too aggressive about enforcement, but someone has to maintain order. Order isn't the same as control, Miss Henderson. You weren't maintaining order. You were punishing me for not asking permission to do something that didn't require permission. She walked away without responding. Life in Desert Springs settled into a comfortable routine after that. The new board was reasonable and focused on actual community issues like maintaining the pool, landscaping, and road repairs, rather than harassing residents over minor perceived violations. I kept all 3 space heaters and used them whenever I wanted. Every time I plugged one in, I felt a small sense of satisfaction. It was a reminder that standing up to unreasonable authority actually works sometimes. Derek and I were having beers on my patio one evening about 6 months after the whole incident when he brought it up. "You know what the craziest part of that whole thing was?" he said. "The $27,000 fine. No, the fact that she actually thought she could get away with it. Like, did she really believe she had the right to just walk into your house and take your stuff? I think she'd been doing similar things for so long that nobody had challenged her before. The HOA gave her a little bit of power, and she convinced herself it was unlimited authority. Well, you definitely made sure she knows better now." I raised my beer bottle. "To standing up to petty tyrants. I'll drink to that." The news station that had originally covered the story did a follow-up piece a few months later about HOA reform efforts in Arizona. Jennifer Liu interviewed me again, this time focusing on the positive changes that had happened at Desert Springs since the incident. The segment featured Patricia Wu talking about the board's new approach to community management, and highlighted how one resident pushing back had improved things for everyone. The fire department report became something of a minor legend in HOA dispute circles. Richard told me he'd cited it in 3 other cases where HOAs were making bogus safety claims to justify overreaching actions. Captain Chen had set a precedent that fire safety couldn't be weaponized for petty disputes. About a year after everything happened, I was leaving for work one morning when a moving truck pulled up 2 houses down. A young couple was unloading boxes. I walked over to introduce myself. "Welcome to the neighborhood," I said. "I'm Nathan Quincy." The guy shook my hand. "Thanks, I'm Mike. This is my wife, Sarah. We just closed yesterday. Congratulations. It's actually a pretty good community. The HOA is reasonable, the neighbors are friendly, and the location is great." Sarah laughed. "That's good to hear." We were worried after reading some of the HOA horror stories online. Actually, we found an article about this neighborhood where someone had their space heaters confiscated or something. Yeah, that was me. Their eyes widened. "Really? What happened?" I gave them the abbreviated version of the story. They listened with increasing disbelief. "And you actually got them back?" Mike asked. "I did. And the board that did it is gone now. The new board is totally different. They focus on actual community maintenance and leave people alone about minor stuff." "That's reassuring," Sarah said. "We were thinking about using space heaters in the bedrooms because the master suite gets cold at night. You'll be fine. Just plug them in and enjoy. If anyone gives you trouble, let me know. I've got a good lawyer." They laughed, but I gave them Richard's business card anyway, just in case. Living in an HOA community is always going to have its quirks and challenges. There are rules and regulations, and someone's always going to be enforcing them. But there's a difference between reasonable enforcement of necessary rules and power-hungry busybodies who see every minor deviation as a personal affront. What happened with my space heaters was ridiculous, but it taught me an important lesson. Documentation matters, knowing your rights matters, and sometimes you have to fight back against unreasonable authority, even when it's uncomfortable and expensive. The heaters themselves became a running joke among my neighbors. For that Halloween, someone actually left a small toy space heater on my doorstep with a note that said, "Please don't let the HOA get me." I laughed and put it on my mantle. The settlement money from the HOA covered all my legal fees and then some. Richard had negotiated a bit extra for my trouble, though we'd kept that part quiet. I used some of it to install a smart doorbell camera system, partly for security, but mostly so I'd have video evidence if anyone ever tried to enter my house without permission again. I also changed my locks and didn't provide a key to the HOA. Patricia assured me they'd only use the master key system for genuine emergencies going forward, but I wasn't taking chances. I left an emergency contact number with the management office instead. The Desert Springs community Facebook page became much more active after my incident. People started posting about other issues they'd been afraid to bring up before, worried about retaliation from Barbara's board. Things like excessive fines for trash cans being visible from the street, demands to repaint houses that were only a few shades off from approved colors, and threats of legal action for Christmas decorations that stayed up past January 1st. Patricia and the new board addressed these concerns directly. They revised the community guidelines to be more reasonable and established a clearer appeal process for violations. They also limited their own authority to enter homes, requiring actual emergency situations with documented cause. One thing that surprised me was how many people reached out from other HOA communities across Arizona and even other states. My story had apparently resonated with a lot of frustrated homeowners dealing with similar situations. I got emails from people asking for advice, wanting Richard's contact information, or just sharing their own horror stories. I started to understand that what happened to me wasn't unique. All across the country, HOA boards with too much power and too little oversight were making life miserable for homeowners. The only difference was I'd had the resources and stubbornness to fight back. Some of those people I talked to ended up filing their own lawsuits or complaints against their HOAs. A few won, which was gratifying to hear. Others decided to just sell and move to neighborhoods without HOAs, which I couldn't blame them for. I thought about moving too for a while. But after the board changed and things settled down, I realized I actually liked Desert Springs. The location was convenient for work, the amenities were nice, and most of my neighbors were good people. One bad board didn't have to ruin the whole community. 2 years after the space heater incident, I was sitting in my home office on a cold January evening, working on a coating project with my oil-filled radiator heater humming quietly beside me. My phone rang. It was Jennifer Liu from the news station. "Nathan, hi. I hope I'm not bothering you." "Not at all. What's up?" "We're doing a special report on HOA reform legislation that's being proposed in the Arizona state legislature. It would limit HOA authority to enter homes, establish clearer appeals processes for violations, and create stronger oversight by the Department of Real Estate. Your case was actually cited as one of the incidents that prompted the legislation. Would you be willing to be interviewed about it?" "Absolutely." The interview aired the following week. The proposed legislation ended up passing 6 months later. It wasn't perfect, but it established better guardrails for HOA authority and gave homeowners more protection against overreach. I testified at one of the legislative hearings, telling my story to a room full of lawmakers and other homeowners with their own experiences. Barbara Henderson was actually there too, testifying against the legislation, arguing that it would make it too difficult for HOAs to maintain property values and safety standards. The lawmakers weren't buying it. One state senator asked her directly, "Miss Henderson, do you still believe you had the right to enter Mr. Quincy's home and confiscate his property without his permission?" "I believed I was acting in the best interest of the community," she replied. "That's not what I asked. Did you have the legal right to do what you did?" She was quiet for a moment. It was within the HOA agreement authority as I understood it at the time. But it wasn't, was it? The fire department found no violations, and you were forced to return his property and pay his legal fees. So did you have the right? In retrospect, perhaps we could have handled the situation differently. The senator nodded. Perhaps. This is exactly why we need clearer legislation protecting homeowners while still allowing HOAs to function appropriately. The bill passed with bipartisan support and was signed into law that summer. I got a framed copy of the bill from Richard as a gift with a note that said, "You started this. Well done." I hung it in my office, right above the outlet where I plug in my space heater. 3 years after everything happened, I was elected to the HOA board myself. I hadn't planned on it, but several neighbors approached me and said they wanted someone on the board who understood the importance of balancing community rules with individual rights. I figured I couldn't complain about HOA governance if I wasn't willing to participate in it. My first board meeting as a member was surreal. I sat at the same table where Barbara Henderson had once sat, but the atmosphere was completely different. We discussed legitimate community issues: a needed roof repair on the clubhouse, landscaping bids for the common areas, and a proposal to update the playground equipment. When someone brought up a potential violation where a resident had painted their front door a non-approved color, I asked what harm it was causing. "Well, it's not in compliance with the guidelines," one board member said. "But is it actually causing a problem? Is it offensive? Is it affecting property values? It's just not approved. Then maybe we should approve it. Or better yet, maybe we should revise our color restrictions to be less rigid." We ended up doing exactly that, expanding the approved color palette and focusing our enforcement efforts on actual problems like abandoned vehicles or unmaintained yards, rather than minor aesthetic choices. I served on the board for 2 terms, 4 years total. During that time, we never once entered someone's home without their explicit permission. We never confiscated anyone's property, and we never used safety concerns as a pretense for enforcing petty rules. We also never had a lawsuit filed against us, which made the community's insurance rates go down. Looking back on the whole experience now, 5 years later, I realize how much that Tuesday morning changed my perspective on a lot of things. I learned that authority needs to be questioned, that documentation is everything, and that sometimes the right thing to do is stand up and fight even when it's easier to just comply. I still live in Desert Springs. I still use my space heaters every winter. And every time I plug one in, I remember that morning when Barbara Henderson walked into my house with her clipboard and her disapproval, thinking she could take my property because I hadn't asked her permission first. She was wrong then, and people like her are still wrong now. Communities need rules, but they also need to remember that the people living in them aren't subjects to be controlled. They're homeowners who deserve respect, privacy, and the basic right to heat their homes however they want within reasonable safety limits. My 3 space heaters still work perfectly, by the way. The ceramic one, the tower heater, and the oil-filled radiator. They're all OL certified, they all have safety features, and they all passed inspection by the fire department with 0 violations. just like I said from the beginning. The end of the story might seem simple, but it represented something bigger. It wasn't just about me getting my property back, or even about the money I spent on legal fees. It was about establishing a principle that HOA authority has limits, and that homeowners don't give up their basic rights when they sign a community agreement. Derek still jokes about the whole thing whenever we have our weekly beers. His favorite line is, "Remember when Barbara thought she could steal your heaters? Good times." The funny thing is, it really does feel like good times now. Not the stress and anger of going through it, but the satisfaction of having stood up for myself and actually won. A lot of people face situations where authority figures overstep, and most of the time, it feels like there's nothing you can do about it. But there usually is something you can do. It might not be easy. It might cost money and time and emotional energy. But it's possible to push back against unreasonable rules and unreasonable people. My advice to anyone facing a similar situation: document everything, know your rights, find a good lawyer if you need one, and don't back down just because someone with a clipboard tells you they're in charge. Because here's the thing about people like Barbara Henderson. They rely on intimidation and the assumption that most people won't fight back. When you do fight back with facts and legal support, they usually fold pretty quickly. The space heaters still sit in my home, doing exactly what they're supposed to do, keeping me warm on cold Arizona nights when the central heating isn't quite enough. They're mundane objects, really. Just basic household appliances that you can buy at any big box store. But they represent something more to me now. They're a reminder that sometimes the smallest things are worth fighting for, not because of their intrinsic value, but because of the principle behind them. Nobody should have the right to walk into your home and take your property because you didn't fill out a form. Nobody should be able to threaten you with tens of thousands of dollars in fines for using a common household appliance. And nobody should be able to lie about safety violations to justify their power trip. The fact that all of those things happened to me, and that I was able to successfully fight back and create positive change not just for myself, but for other homeowners in my community and eventually across the state, is something I'm genuinely proud of. It wasn't the way I expected to spend the first year in my new home after my divorce, but life rarely goes according to plan. Sometimes it throws you curveballs that force you to either stand up for yourself or get rolled over. I chose to stand up, and it made all the difference. The heaters are still here, still working, still warming my home. And Barbara Henderson is no longer on the HOA board, no longer able to harass homeowners over imaginary violations. That feels like a pretty good outcome to me.